Welcome to Telegeography Explains the Internet, the show that explores the business behind all of the ways humans stay connected around the world. I'm your host, Greg Bryan, and my guest today is Joe DePalo, who's Chief Platform Officer at Netskope. Joe comes to Netskope and the security world with a deep background in cloud and networks, so he can frame security challenges from the perspective that I'm really used to talking about on the show from that network side. Most of our conversation was really centered around the central concept of how geography influences network security. And Joe can use this background in network to help his customers and us listening to this episode understand why location matters when securing your network. So we talk about how the network has changed over the past few years and the impact on the threat landscape and how networks perform more generally. We talk about how enterprises can't just get traffic to the cloud and then forget about it, but that middle mile performance and security have to be a part of that equation. We talk about the lessons learned from the challenges of creating CDNs and how those might be instructive for the modern issues in the WAN. We touch on the process of how Netskope works with customers to understand their infrastructure to ensure adequate security is applied. And finally, as I often like to at the end of the show, I get Joe's take on what it even means to have a WAN in this environment. And I thought he had a particularly interesting comment about that question that I've asked to many guests. It was a great conversation, and I'm really excited to let you get to the interview. Enjoy. Okay, welcome to the show, Joe.
Hey, thanks. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So, Joe, we always like to start the show out by figuring out who you are. So I thought I'll give you a brief introduction here on your background and then as well sort of what you do at Netskope.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah. So I am a large-scale network infrastructure leader. I have been building large-scale cloud CDN ISP infrastructure for 27 years. So
Wow.
at Netskope, I built and run the network platform, which we'll talk about today. But before that, I ran and built the network and edge infrastructure for AWS, for Amazon. Before that, I was at Level 3 and Limelight Networks and Carrier and CDN. So I've been, for 27 years, I've been in cloud and carrier infrastructure for a long time. And so I'm bringing my team and my skill set to the security space, and I'm excited to share what that means today.
Well, I think that actually cues us up well, even because, we're always trying to think about how do network and security now work together, right? So your background is the example of that, basically. So as it happens, I've actually done a telegeography webinar with Netskope before. So there's some background there, but I assume a lot of our listeners don't necessarily know what you guys do. Do you mind giving us just a quick rundown of what Netskope does?
Sure. Yeah, we started off as a top brand CASB, so a cloud access security broker, web security. Netskope provides an industry-leading secure access service edge, so SASE solution. We provide all the necessary technology building blocks on the security and networking side, including offering SSE, security service edge, and our own SD-WAN. So at its core, Netskope helps organizations apply zero trust principles to better protect data and defend against cyber threats. By taking advantage of the global coverage, Netskope provides optimized access and real-time security for people, devices, and data anywhere they go. It's really the next generation of cloud firewall, cloud security, married with the top platform.
Excellent. All right. Yeah, that's very helpful. And I think helps me sort of queue up what I want to focus on today, which we're going to start really in looking at kind of the internet as the WAN. So folks familiar with my work at telegeography will know that obviously something I've been talking about for a long time is the decline of the MPLS-centric network and the move towards an internet-first kind of hybrid WAN. Everybody knows that trend has been long underway, driven by SD-WAN, driven by especially cloud adoption, I think. But the ramifications of it, of course, are where it gets really interesting, right? And a key to that is how it has changed the security posture, right? So I want to start out, Joe, by sort of just picking your brain on kind of like when we look at that internet first WAN, particularly the performance in the last mile and the middle mile, is that adequate for sort of enterprise grade network performance?
Yeah, it's tough because as the internet has evolved, there has been adaptation of different technologies. And so, if you go all the way back to the ISP days,
Hmm.
right, you needed middle mile and long haul to move bits between cities and locations.
Right.
As you added CDN and live events and large media, large files, you needed the ability to do caching and have edge capacity, edge storage. And then cloud service, you need a lot of density in a small region, right? Whether it's power or electrical. And now you have security. And so the underlying internet, the technology, the middle mile, the last mile, the underlying infrastructure is just not designed to handle what's required to run a security service.
Hmm.
It's the latency, it's the performance, but it's also the security. And it sounds cliche, but it is another evolution. Whereas in the caching space, we needed to create new technologies and new offerings to be able to deliver large media live events. And the same thing with cloud. We needed huge metro networks. At Amazon, we laid over 1 million fiber pairs in
Yeah.
these metro regions, and the same thing's evolving in security. You can't just use yesterday's technologies or yesterday's advancement, and you can't just use the internet to deliver a cloud security service. It's just not going to work for you.
Yeah, exactly. The internet was born for a very different purpose than what enterprises need out of it. And I think the changeover from MPLS to the world that we're in now happened for good reasons, right? So that wasn't a sort of mistake, but it does spur all of these new things that we now need to think about. In
Well,
particular, yeah, please go ahead.
let me jump in. So
Yeah.
MPLS or VPN, it really was, or even SD WAN, it was designed to overcome underlying infrastructure, either limitations of technology,
Mm-hmm.
capacity, or even cost.
Yeah.
And so what happens now is, for years it would be very expensive to order fiber or have direct net delivery for enterprises, and so you needed overlays, you needed
Mm-hmm.
MPLS, you needed VPN clients, but the evolution of the underlying infrastructure is now become more affordable. So you don't need compression, you don't need
Mm-hmm.
QoS as much, and so the underlying internet technologies have advanced in the sense of the physical capacities, but the overlays are staying in space. And so that's where the security platform comes in to take use of the underlying infrastructure and maybe be done with a little of the overlay and the complexities and costs that come with overlay infrastructure.
Right. So you're saying that the bandwidth is there, at least in a lot of places, right? So, but that throwing bandwidth at the problem in the case of security is not an adequate answer, right?
Exactly. Or if you don't have bandwidth and then you're using overlays and then security on top of it. So go one way or the other, add bandwidth and then add the security over the top. But what you're doing is you're having limited connectivity, a single provider or a single path, running
Hmm.
a bunch of overlays and then want your security to run on top of that. And then you're
Right.
wondering why you're having performance issues. And so you maybe need to strip away some of the complexities because every new technology was taking advantage of their market, but also using limited infrastructure, right? BGP,
Mm.
TCP, IP, these are all limited based on what you can do. And so everybody cuts corners and tries their best. Well, with security and the platform, you got to strip away a bunch of that noise, and get back to the things that matter, which is performance, reach, and then ultimately that visibility to the users.
It's kind of that general principle of subtraction or streamlining can sometimes get you to the end point faster.
And I'm always surprised at how little the enterprise networker knows about their underlying infrastructure. They assume if
Mm.
it's in the cloud, it's good. They assume if they're giving it to an ISP, it's good, right? But
Hmm.
ISPs struggle with the middle mile. Cloud providers struggle with getting low latency to the edge for all their applications. And so you can't just use someone else's infrastructure and assume it's okay. You have to take some form of ownership and understanding of the direct path. And as users are getting further away from corporate offices, traveling again, working remote, working WeWork offices, Starbucks, right? You need to be able to secure from anywhere, but with that comes latency because the security products add attacks. And
Hmm.
if you have if you have crappy internet, if you have an overlay, if you have a VPN, and then you want to put security on top, the user experience is going to be so bad it won't even matter.
Right, because you're already soaking up so many things into that connection that you have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So of course one of the things we think about a lot at telegeography is where all of your telecom infrastructure actually sits, and we map cloud on ramps and cloud regions, and it's surprising, honestly, Joe, how often we'll talk to people, managing large networks or even working within the industry that just never think about this, right? Because there is still an extent to which the cloud is just there, right? You connect to the cloud, but of course, we're trying to show people that where that happens and how you connect matters, right?
Yeah, the internet is not a utility. It's not managed by anybody. And so
Hmm.
just drawing that cloud on the whiteboard doesn't mean it's something you get to ignore. You have to look at what's under that, under the cloud, whether it's a cloud provider or whether it's a public cloud like a hyperscaler or whether it's just the internet provider. You can no longer get away with, if you want to be truly secure and you want to have that performance, you no longer can just rely on a third party to manage it.
Hmm. Absolutely. And something else that comes up for us often when we're talking to the enterprise side is just how much cultural change there has had to be on the enterprise in the last several years, where cybersecurity was once kind of a domain, and then
Mhm.
network, and they didn't have to interact that much. They learned over the last few years that they needed to interact more and understand each other a little better. But especially you coming from sort of having built all these networks and then to the security side, what's your take on sort of the enterprise ability to get the network team and the security team speaking the same language and understanding each other?
Yeah, it's funny. I always just assumed I'd be building in network infrastructure and never have to worry about security. But
Hmm.
overnight, it merged. I always joke it's chocolate and peanut butter. You don't think about it, but it is. It does fit together, and you
They
can't
do
have
belong together,
they
exactly.
belong
Yeah,
together.
yeah.
And so, it's the networkers get it, right. The enterprise network manager understands the performance and requirements. The security person, the CISO or the chief security management within an organization, understands the burden. It all comes down to implementation, right? And
Hmm.
so you have to be able to deliver an experience to your users that allows them to do their job. Okay.
Right.
With that becomes challenges as you need to integrate and manage different security applications, right?
Hmm.
A security operator, a security manager would deploy as many solutions as possible to secure the business, the intellectual property. But if it slows down the work, what good is it, right? And
Right.
so that's where there's a marriage, right? Where the security person has to determine what applications, what policies, which is very important. But there has to be a mechanism of which it's deployed and which it's implemented that it doesn't affect the business. And so typically you've been able to use a firewall. Everybody has to backhaul, or you're all in the office. The policy's the policy. It didn't really matter. And then
Hmm.
with the remote users, there was public cloud and cloud services. And now all of a sudden your domain of which you can manage is vast. And you
Right.
have to have visibility into that network performance, the vehicle, if you will, for the security application. And so the teams are having to work together like they've never before. And ultimately, it does all tie together. And so you no longer, whether you're a security operator or a network operator, you no longer can just blame it on someone else or point to the other guy. You
Right.
have to be able to understand both when you're making these decisions.
Yeah, and I think very much to your point that at the end of the day, the network team fields calls from people saying like, "Hey, this isn't working," right? And you don't want that to be the fault of that it's secure, right?
Right.
So,
Well, yeah. What they'll do is they'll turn it off.
right.
Right. We have some solutions in the space where you just bypass. Well, that's not a solution, right? And so you call the help desk or the network operator, and it says it's slow when I run this agent or I steer this traffic. And you turn off, it stops. Okay. Well, then you turn it off. Well, that's not going to work. And so
Hmm.
everybody's one breach away from a lot of bad attention. And so you could bypass, you could play games, but ultimately you get caught. You get caught with that. You're going to be in a lot of trouble as a business. And so
Right.
it's just not something you can ignore, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of I think key to that, the impact of latency on performance is exactly what I was getting at with the thinking through the sort of geography of all of this, right? So I want to focus on that a little bit more and sort of get your take on for each application, understanding what its destination is, where it belongs, like in the cloud, and that sort of thing. And I should preface this by saying, when we talk to enterprises, we do some surveys of them. We see a huge variety of where their data and applications sit, right? So there's still some on-prem, and so you have folks that are in branch offices or satellite offices that need to get back to a kind of headquarters office. There's some in the public cloud. There's some in the private cloud. When I ask this question, usually most of the big multinationals check all of the possible options, right? We have data centers on-prem. We have data centers in public cloud, sometimes bare metal servers. All of this sort of like complexity leading you to, I think, have a lot of confusion about, like, one, how do I make sure that performs well, obviously, as the network team, and everyone's getting the applications and data they need. But then two, my security threat perimeter has just expanded sort of exponentially, right? So how do you guys think about helping enterprises through this problem?
Yeah, it's a great question. For the first time, probably in the network operator or the IT department, the expansion of their coverage is out of their control.
Right.
And so we're gonna have a policy where we allow remote workers. We're gonna open an office in China. We're gonna make different changes to the way the users interact, and it's up to them to chase the business direction. Before, you opened an office and everything went where it was supposed to go, and you didn't have to worry about it. We're now, to your point, the domain of coverage is vast. And so what we find is two things: is when they use us and they work with us, they find issues and or users they were unaware of, and or they didn't realize how bad the experience was. And so let me talk a little bit about our platform and our approach, which is really focused on comprehensive global coverage. And so
Right.
we run over 100 data centers. We focus very heavily on peering and interconnecting with every cloud service, every ISP. So we don't rely on an internet provider. We don't rely on a public cloud. We want that visibility. We want to see the performance in every region, on every corner of the globe. We want to be able to provide and cover that experience. Our platform is designed to provide low latency global coverage, not designed to do other things. We don't sell shoes. We don't sell ads. We don't sell software. Right? We focus on just one thing, and every one of our data centers runs full compute, so we can hairpin the security application. And so if you're an enterprise, and if you're dealing with China, or if you're dealing with the different parts of Asia, Australia, South America, it may be a small portion of your user base, but ultimately it is still very important. And our coverage is, we're not trying to provide latency or experience or performance in certain markets. We want global coverage. And we have several customers, whether it's a bank or insurance or medical or enterprise, retail. We have thousands of customers that have users in every market and want that comprehension. But also in markets like Los Angeles or New York City, where there's a lot of density, there's a lot of backhauling and a lot of congestion, we will demystify that internet. We will clear that cloud for them, and we will make sure that the user path and visibility is such that the experience enables the security application, so that the user and the workflow doesn't have to stop.
Yeah, absolutely. You bring up an interesting point there, that there's kind of several scales at which this becomes interesting. One is like the global scale, right? So your office distribution around the world, you need to be able to get your traffic through the gates that it needs to get through and whatnot in a reasonable amount of time. Whether you have employees sitting in Australia or whatever the case may be, but also on a much more micro geographic scale, right? So you mentioned like Los Angeles and New York, that then you're dealing with different problems. There's a lot of traffic, but then that's where you're also dealing with, okay, well, then I also have like a lot of remote workers on a bunch of random ISPs, or somebody who's, the road warrior whose device is checking in from a different place around the US all the time, or whatever the case may be. So is that something that you help people sort of think through about how to attack these problems with all those different scales of geographic issues, basically?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We started off talking about um, the underlying infrastructure and being able to eliminate the overlay. But what happens if you don't have any control over that infrastructure? If it's a remote user working from home or on the road? And so what we do is we focus on the global coverage. We focus on the latency for every ISP, every IP address. And what we do is we almost like an overlay
Hmm.
is we look at all the network paths. We look at the optimal performance. You don't necessarily need your own backbone because then you're limited. It's very expensive. You're limited to the use lease in someone else's network. Where what we do is we interconnect with every ISP. We can see the paths of their backbone, and we can control and
Hmm.
manipulate the traffic, the latency, find the best path. A lot of times, you'd be surprised the variability in performance between an event or an outage of some sort. And so we're constantly converging and making those changes because we started this conversation by talking about how the enterprise needs to be more aware of the underlying infrastructure. And part of that can be just in your decision making process of choosing a cloud service that is aware
Mm.
of that and is purpose built and focused on building infrastructure for that user experience versus other things, right?
That's a good point. So you're saying sort of, the where that decision gets made is an important part. In other words, like being more aware of your infrastructure and the traffic patterns and all that doesn't mean having the enterprise sitting in a knock and understanding
Right.
all of this, right? You know what I mean? But
Exactly
it
right.
means understanding how your vendors are taking care of that and leaving this sort of visibility into the backbone to someone else, right?
Yeah,
Who's,
let me
yeah.
ask you a question. So if you're buying a cloud service, okay, regardless of what it is, and that cloud service is using somebody else for their delivery of their network,
Mhm.
who do you call if something breaks?
Right, right,
Right?
precisely. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And so you call the overlay, the service on top. Well, they're going to call someone else. Well, what if you have a user in Chicago that's having a bad experience? Is anybody in that flow going to be able to make that change for you? Is anybody optimizing that delivery? And when you think about it from that perspective, there's nothing you can do. You're assuming the underlying ISP or the underlying hyperscaler is going to do what's best for you, but
Mhm.
it's not. They run other products, they run other infrastructure on top of that, and so you're just one of many on someone else's network versus a security purpose built that overcomes internet congestion, internet deficiencies. I mean, some of the protocols, man, we've been running for 40 years, right?
Right,
They're not evolving. And
right.
so somebody has to kind of overcome that and tie it together.
It's kind of instead of turtles all the way down, it's trouble tickets all the way down, right?
Yeah,
So
that's it. It's always the network's fault. You know that. It's
yeah,
always the network's fault.
right. But whose network?
That's
Right?
exactly right. If you can blame someone else, I guess that's what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a great point. And another thing I kind of wanted to follow up with you on, in particular, that relates to that is just thinking through having come from the CDN world, and you sort of mentioned before that okay, when we were working in creating CDNs and caching and had to think through what problems emerge. How do you think that helps you apply these new security sort of postures in thinking about the lessons learned from CDNs, if you will, to the SASE kind of SSE world.
Yeah, the similarities are pretty eerie. It's completely different application, but the CDN space, we were in for a very long time, was exhausting the capabilities of the providers. Right? We talk about
Mm-hmm.
net neutrality, which we won't get
Right.
into.
Yeah.
You talk about live events, streaming to your home and other things, and so the CDN space really stretched the capabilities of providers and came up with embedded caching solutions like what Netflix has done, but ultimately, that they were able to adapt to what they needed to expand the internet capabilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, whereas in the same security application space, the security network, the overlay, there's that same problem, right? There is no clear underlying thing you plug into, and you're going to get what you need to get to. And so, just like in the CDN space, just like in the public cloud, you're going to have to adapt and build and change what you're trying to do. And that's what we're here pushing that envelope. We're just like in the early CDN days, early ISP days, early public cloud. We're
Mm-hmm.
pushing that envelope to overcome underlying deficiencies of the internet. A lot of misconceptions about capabilities. I get a lot of customers scratching their heads when I try to explain to them the internet's not your friend. is
Right,
something
right.
that you have to evolve from, and that's what we're in now. We're even though security network it's natural, we're still really in the early days of being able to make good use of the underlying internet for security services. There's still a lot of work to be done.
And why is that exactly? It's you sort of mentioned it that's because of the structure of how the internet was built, what it was built to do, and that the protocols are 40 years old. But what are some of the sort of particular struggles, if you will?
It's money. And
All
so, yeah,
right, yeah.
so it really is, right? So that was the whole net neutrality. Again, I'll bring that up, but
Hmm.
it comes down to the ISPs. There are no global ISPs. There are no
Right,
global carriers, right? And so you have to interconnect. Whoever sends more has to pay or not pay, right? With settlement-free peering and
right.
all of that, which we won't get into as well, maybe for a future call. But the ISPs don't make any money in the middle, okay?
Hmm.
And the cloud providers make all their money in concentrated regions, and so no one has a financial incentive to provide compute and or low latency to the edge, right?
Right.
So like the CDN space, there was so much demand from end users that it forced ISPs and content providers to figure something out. And what's
Hmm.
happening here is there's so much demand in providing a secure service, but also a low latency experience
Right.
that there is this evolution of the infrastructure that has to happen because it is coming hot and heavy. Every customer we have has a different challenge, has a different demand, and the bad guys, they're not slowing down. And because
Hmm.
more things are online and the blast radius is as big as it's ever been, there's a huge demand for coverage, for experience, and for the efficacy of a security solution. And so it's as big as the others are. The expansion of the security on the internet is the same.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So, sort of very much to your point, it's been a big part of what I've done with my career at telegeography is looking at, sort of network prices throughout time. And,
Hmm.
as long as I've been talking to carriers about their prices, about, ISPs and backbone providers or whatever, you could take me to any point in the last decade and they would say at this price per meg the business will be unsustainable for me, and then you crash through that price per meg, right? And then
Race to
yeah,
zero, right?
right, exactly. And why are they still there? Because demand, as much as all those supply increases and all that sort of keep going, demand is never going away, right? The enterprise, let alone the consumer, only ever do more things that need all of these services and whatnot. But you make a really fair point that that the ISPs, the backbone providers, are they're focusing on having high bandwidth pipes, and there's not a lot more that they really can do with what their business model is.
The good thing about this versus in public cloud, the public cloud's making all the money. In CDN, the content creators is making all the money. In the
Mm-hmm.
security space, we're just trying to secure the user experience between the enterprise and their application of choice.
Right.
And so we're not taking money from either side. If you're
Mm-hmm.
selling a good service, good cloud service, if you're selling a customer database service or a billing software or some component on word processing or whatever. If you're selling a good service, we can then enable that so it's secure and that it can continue. We're not
Right.
trying to take away from either side, and so there is incentive for the carriers and for the cloud providers to participate. There's incentive for the enterprise, and so this will be a little different. It won't be a race to zero because the value is there, but
Mm-hmm.
also everybody gets their participation in the benefit versus in the other business model, only one person was making any money.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting point, and certainly something that we've been thinking through the last few years as you move away from, sort of MPLS was there to replace, exponential number of private lines between offices and that sort of thing, and as you get away from a private network and then a sort of virtual private network as it were in MPLS, then you're doing that because it's going to save you a lot of money, right? Internet is cheaper than MPLS. Why is internet cheaper than MPLS? Well, because there's these other things that you have to think about, right? So I
Right.
think one of the things I've been doing over the past several years is showing enterprises that, like, okay, there is a pretty big delta between this all MPLS world and the internet first world, and that's why it's worth doing. But the story over that time has changed a lot from if you were talking to someone from an SD-WAN provider in 2017, 2018, something like, oh, cut your network spend in half. It's like, well, no one really, in most circumstances is actually cutting their network spend in half. What you're doing is getting a much larger, more functional network with more bandwidth and lower latencies or whatever for maybe the same price, right? You know what I mean? So I think that's what enterprises need to think through is that, okay, so I might have these costs like, when I had centralized breakouts, I had this one firewall there. And now my cost structure might change, but I'm getting this much more performative network as a result.
And there's a simple way to think about it is that if you're paying for something that someone else is paying someone else to deliver,
right,
you're losing either performance, you're paying more than you should, or it's not secure. And so ultimately you want to try with your MPLS example, cloud security, cloud, whichever it is, right? Cloud is just someone else's computer. You're just paying someone else to pay someone else to offer a part of it. And
right.
so if you're an enterprise network, it's to the point now where you need to start stripping out some of these layers. We have several customers that pay one internet provider, and that one internet provider is going to lease fiber from someone else, buy transit from peering from someone else. And so they're just piecing it together. You lose visibility, you lose control, and ultimately you end up paying a premium. And so it sounds cliche, but if you strip away some of this, some of the excess layers, you can actually, like you said, save some money and get more because you're not paying other people's margins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. All right, so Joe, when an enterprise comes to you and they say, okay, here's my situation, right? Here's my network. What's your process for sort of understanding? Because I think that's one of the big issues too, is that from the enterprise side, there's a feeling like, oh, this used to be pretty straightforward. I had a firewall in my DMZ, right? Yep. How do you approach this issue with the enterprise who has maybe adopted SD-WAN, they've gone to a hybrid kind of network, and now they're trying to make sure that they aren't going to end up on the headlines, right? And have an embarrassing breach or something like that. How do you help them work through the complexity of this problem?
Sure. Yeah. So at Netskope, we offer lots of assessments, right? We offer a Network 360 assessment, which we will, before the sales process even starts, we'll do an audit for them. We'll look at their IP addresses. We'll look at their carrier mix. We'll look at the underlying paths they take, and we'll help them deconstruct that because most customers are not aware of three things. It's usually we ask them the same question: how many cloud services do you think you use?
Mm-hmm.
They always say 5 to 6, and it's always hundreds.
Right.
There's something like 2,000 cloud services, and so then they're at a shock. We ask them about their carrier mix and underlying infrastructure. They know very little. And then we ask about their user dispersion. Where are your users at? And again, they know very little. And so what we can do is we can come in there and consolidate those three things. These are all the cloud services you're using. This is where all your users are coming from. This is the topology of your underlying infrastructure. And then you start from there, and then you look at the security applications on top. We have the best DLP service. We have the best threat efficacy. So our security product is second to none, but you got to start at that platform layer. You got to understand what you're dealing with. Right. And decouple that because if you start at the top and you start worrying about security efficacy or threat or what you're securing, you might miss stuff layers down. We can do dedicated IP addresses. We can do customer peering. We can do embedded solutions. So we have so many things we can do on our platform that provide a unique experience, but also tear out all those other layers. That makes it so much simpler for the network operator. And as an enterprise network person, that they have, I find that they all have more work than time, and more things to do than people. And so, maybe use a vendor that can simplify things for you a little bit.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. So, in fact, I'm in the midst of doing interviews for our annual WAN manager survey, and was just talking to an IT infrastructure manager the other day, and was saying that they have a team of about 6 network engineers for a company that has about 180 sites globally. Right?
Can you imagine? Yeah, hundreds of links. Good luck trying to manage that. Yeah.
hmm And granted, and that's the idea. There's lots of stuff that they know they need to outsource or whatever. But I think also very much to your point is understanding, sort of even what network do I have, who do I get it from. That's a big challenge, right? And when you ask people about cloud, of course, what they're thinking of primarily is the big five or six like infrastructure as a service providers, like, oh,
Yeah.
cloud, we use AWS and Azure and maybe a little bit of like Google or whatever the case may be, but really cloud is anything delivered over the internet, and that's thousands. To talk about shadow IT, there's
Yeah.
probably like hundreds of shadow IT kind of cloud subscriptions in any given enterprise that the network team
The
is looking
biggest thing
over.
we find is that, okay, so you have a handful of cloud services, but what about the instances?
Right.
What about, are they using a personal instance? Are they using the work? Are they in the wrong department? Are they uploading passwords to a personal file and unaware? And so
Right.
a lot of the things we find are just user error, or user unaware. And so all of that stuff comes into play when you're trying to manage this type of service.
So it's almost more about sort of doing an audit than it is going straight to a technological solution in a sense, right?
Right. That's exactly
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so Joe, this has been really interesting. It's been great to get your view on where all of this is going. I want to now take it to sort of like looking forward and kind of what this looks like. Like first, just from specifically just kind of the SASE perspective of like been out a couple of years now, right? Everyone knows on the enterprise side that this is something that we have to look into. How do you think that market is developing, and our enterprises sort of catching up with what they need to understand about adopting SASE, SSE, that kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what's happening is, because the market is a growing market, because the demand is there. There are a lot of companies and businesses that are going to enter that market, and so it's going to get very confusing
Exactly.
for the enterprise buyer. There's
A
going to
lot of
be
SASE washing, right?
a
Yeah.
lot of SaaS, every ISP all of a sudden, every CDN, every cloud service. And so if you, there are so many acronyms, I don't know how these poor guys keep it straight.
I know.
And so it is
Yeah.
going to be very, very confusing. And the other part of it is, we talk to so many enterprises, and they have so many vendors to manage. And even within a single vendor, they have so many different platforms, because these
Mhm.
vendors buy all these technologies and bolt them on top. And so it comes down to stripping away. You no longer, back in the day, right? You could just hire IBM or Cisco
Right.
or AWS, and just let them kind of do everything. And in the SASE space, it's going to get so crowded and so confusing that these enterprise, they're going to have to start to simplify, and they're going to have to work with vendors that offer multiple layers, network services with security services and
Mhm.
other things. It's something that we work with customers that 500,000 users across the globe, and it's something that the challenges they experience are adapting. And so we have to, whether it's modify the platform, whether it's adjust the security product, you have to be able to evolve and adapt to what the customers are, because the threats are changing, the underlying landscape of the enterprise is changing. And so it is, if I could predict where it's going to go, I would not be working, right? But
That's right. Yeah.
for the most part, it is
Yeah.
going to get real cloudy. Sorry, pardon the pun.
Yeah, no. I think that's exactly right from my perspective. Certainly, is that like SD-WAN, right? We had to sort of land on what is actually being performed by an SD-WAN service, and how is that different from other services that are out there, right? So we've been trying to at telegeography on the sort of analyst side, just even determine kind of like what are the actual products. So obviously CASB, right, is core to that or whatever, but that I think enterprises want to just understand, like for me to say, hey, CTO, CIO, or CISO for that matter, right? Like we're on top of this. This is what we have. For you, from your perspective, is there a sort of sine qua non, if you will, like that like a core of, hey, we're making sure that we have this covered with these products, if that makes sense?
Yeah, for sure. We work with Gartner. We
Hmm.
love those magic quadrants. There's a lot of feedback and direction there, especially, they talk to hundreds of customers and they gather those requirements. We have great relationships with our customers and the roadmaps of their necessity. We do have a lot of foresight because of anticipation, because we do get to see both sides, right? We get to see
Hmm.
the expansion of the threats and what's happening in that space, but we also get to see the challenges the customers are saying. And so, it's a little bit of a hand wavy answer, but we take input from the analyst,
Hmm.
take
Hmm.
input from the customers, and we use our own foresight to determine that direction. And we've been in business for 10 years. We have a lot of experience on kind of all three factors, and you tie in our control of our platform and our strength in our security product, and we do anticipate, if you will, where the puck's going to be
Yeah.
for our customers. Yeah.
No, 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 that makes a lot of sense. And particularly in this space, I often joke with my colleagues who cover like submarine cables. I'm like, oh, submarine cables, yeah, there's new technologies on either end, and
Sure.
better pick cards and whatnot. But like
Sure.
the WAN space is dizzying in comparison, right? It's
Yeah, unfortunately, when in the subsea space, you got to worry about sharks, but
right.
there's only so many of those. Where in the WAN space, there's different layers of complexity there, and I don't know a lot of enterprises that are going to be using submarine cables anytime soon. But
Mhm.
every enterprise needs to use WAN services.
Yeah, right, right. Exactly, exactly. All right. So then on to my kind of like more philosophical question. I often like to close out the show when I have a guest like you that thinks about this kind of stuff often. Is this philosophical question of what is the WAN then, right? So if ultimately we have a world where enterprises are connecting to the internet to get to their workloads that are delivered via the cloud, applications delivered by the cloud, and the security is an overlay service, is that a wide area network at all anymore in a certain sense, right? Or do we have what a lot of the sort of providers have kind of feared, perhaps to a certain extent over time, and just sort of dumb pipes and some software, right?
I got to tell you, man, the WAN is dead or dying. I got to be the LAN is dead and dying,
Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
so it's the internet, right? It's the our chocolate peanut butter example. It's going to be the internet. The WAN is going to drift into the as close to the user and the network as possible
Right.
as it can. The LAN also is going to so they're all going to blend together. And so
Hmm.
before, where you had your walled off infrastructure, and then you had your DMARC, and then you had your point to point or your internet, all that's going away, right? And
Hmm.
so the overlay technologies, the single ISPs, the local networks of non-routable addresses, like all of that from a transition, all that's
Hmm.
going RFC 1918, all of that is going away to the point of a blend. And so
Hmm.
you need to be able to manage users on any source network. You need to be able to run any protocol or security across short or long networks. And so it is the internet, and it's going to evolve to be its own new thing, because it's changing, and the users are not stopping.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I've thought that, with SASE and sort of zero trust before that, even the whole idea was that I can just be a device, almost more like how consumers have been doing this forever, right? Just at the enterprise scale, right? That
That's
I'm
exactly
just
right.
I'm just a user on a device, and it doesn't matter where that device is, as long as I have my credentials, then I get what I need, and I don't really have to be in a network necessarily.
Wow. Yeah. Am I in a VPN? Am I in the corporate office? Which Wi-Fi am I logging into? Which firewall am I backhauling to? Am I using an overlay? Like, a lot of that is they're trying to hold on to it, right? But
Hmm.
a lot of that is just like I said, because the business is determining now where the users are and how they're interfacing with the internet and the applications. The enterprise is losing that control. And
Hmm.
I hate to sound like a commercial, but the platform that we built was an anticipation of before SSC, before SASE, before any of that was coined. The platform that we built was designed to manage and handle a lot of the challenges the enterprise network person has to see going forward. And so I'm excited to see and watch as this grows, and to adapt our platform and the user space. I was lucky enough to be early in the fiber days. I was lucky enough to be early CDN, lucky enough to be early cloud, and so now maybe the final leg is this security network merging. So I'm excited for the future.
Yeah, the fourth wave. Absolutely. Cool. All right.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, Joe, this has been great fun. Thanks so much for the insights. If listeners want to keep up with you and what you guys are doing at Netskope, how can they do that?
Yeah, sure, man. Thanks for the time. Obviously, Netskope.com. You can get our blogs and press releases. We have a trust portal, which talks a little bit more about our infrastructure. You can subscribe to that. So trust.netscope.com. And I'm on LinkedIn, and Netskope's on LinkedIn. If anybody wants to chat it up, we're happy to talk about this stuff. So again, man, thanks a lot for the time and the ability to kind of share with you.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. It was great talking to you. It's always fun when somebody can talk the language that I think about all the time. So,
Sure. Yeah. Just not the
yeah,
voices in your head, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. Cheers.
Solid.
Thanks for listening. Telegeography Explains the Internet comes from the experts here at Telegeography. It's edited and produced by Jane Miller, and it's hosted by me, Greg Bryan. And I also wrote that theme song you're listening to right now. To learn more about our data, jump over to telegeography.com, and we'll see you on the internet.